So we've been working on university detail program and we can have it print out details pretty easily. But now we want to improve our code by rather than just displaying information, we want to send that information by email to our student because university details can be very long. And because each student have a different email address, we want a way so that the student can give us their email address and we can send that information on their email address. So let's write a function that can send information to unique email addresses. We can start by writing a function that prints out text like university details sent at dummy@gmail.com. But we'll want to be able to change this email address to the student email address, not just dummy values. So far, we have just seen functions work using internal information like variables or values we type in. But this time, we want to be able to give our function information from the outside world, outside of this definition. We can input data like email into our function by using something called parameters. Parameters are variables that we can place inside our parentheses of our function definition that our function can then use. For our custom university detail, we want to be able to input and use a string variable that tells us the email of the student. To access this string, we'll need to ask for it by including it as a parameter inside our parentheses. And now we can use this variable email ID inside our function code. This is like when we declared a variable inside our function and could use it. The main difference is that any variable we declared inside our function can only be accessed and used inside that function and nowhere else. So now we can include this email ID string in our message, and instead of saying university details sent at dummy@gmail.com, we can say university details send at plus email ID and use string concatenation to print out a unique message for each email address. But now when I call this function university detail, I can't just type university detail with empty parentheses. And that's because this function expects a string email ID as an input. So in my function call, I have to put in a string like the email john.doe@gmail.com, and this specific input is called an argument. So parameters are the variables inside our function definition, like the string email ID, and arguments are the actual value that are passed to our function when we call it, like johndoe@gmail.com, which our function needs to work. When we call our function, our argument has to match the type of parameter we expect in our function. So in this case, our email has to be in a string. Now if I put in the string as argument in our function call, Java will look at our function definition and assign this value to our string email ID, and our function call will print out a message that's unique to this email ID, like university details sent at johndoe@gmail.com. This is so cool. And I can repeat this code and input any other email ID I want. Our function will accept any string input and string email ID will be assigned its value. So if I call university detail and pass the string lejane@hotmail.com, the print output will be university details sent at lejane@hotmail.com. Now we can call our function and pass in different string email ID to it every time. This is just like we've been doing with println by passing the different strings each time. Let's see some more example of how parameters can be useful.